Good everyone. This is the factory tour Ask the Developer or Meet the Developer session for the Domino development team. That includes database team, security, platforms, and TCO, total cost of ownership. My name is Gary Rail. I'm going to show you a quick preview of something that's going to be coming out in the next early access drop. And then I'll pass it on to Norma, and she will show you some new things, and then we'll open it up for general questions. Okay. Right, so I'm just going to run through a couple of quick slides. One of the features that we're going to be giving you access to here in the next early access drop is what we call the one-touch setup and configuration. So, you've all done enough Domino installs and setups that you know that traditionally you have to run an install shield install program, then you have to do typically you'll use a standalone Java setup program to do some initial configuration. There's other ways to do it, but that's pretty common. And after you've done the initial server setup, you then typically have to go into the Domino administrator to perform some other configuration tasks before your Domino server is really truly up and running. Things like configuring a vault would be a standard one, registering additional servers, registering users, typical tasks. So what we're doing with the Domino 12 one-touch, we call it, or single-click install really, is we're taking those setup steps and we're allowing you to create a JSON file that tells us how you want those parameters to be set. And then we can just execute the setup and bring up the server in a configured way all in one step. And I'm going to do a demo here. Of course, what we're transitioning to here, the reason we're making these types of changes is because we are going to be continuing to support traditional on-premises installations, but also moving more toward a container world. This is just going to simplify container configuration. So the JSON that you pass in, I don't know if Gabby is in this session, but she said she was afraid of JSON or didn't know JSON, is actually pretty simple. We have a couple of different sections. Each one is a step in the setup process. So in this case, we're going to do a server setup, followed by an ID vault configuration. And for those of you who have done a lot of setups, I think these parameters are going to map pretty cleanly to the dialog box panels. For example, server type. Here we have server setup. Server is standalone server. Server name is, corresponds to the next dialog panel. Server title, Domino domain. Again, they're a pretty straight mapping. And here you can see the organization parameters and the administrative parameters. So there are a couple of new things that are brand new in Domino 12. One of them is that you can also ask the server setup to do some registration. So at the end of the server setup, after the initial server, the first server is set up itself, in this case, we're going to have it go ahead and just generate a pool of additional server IDs so that we can bring up additional servers. And this is pretty cool. You can also say, as part of the setup, we'd like you to go ahead and create the ID vault. And that's new for Domino 12 as well. So you probably noticed that there are some password, sort of sensitive password fields that are in those basic configuration files. And of course, typically you would not want to actually embed the password into a JSON file. You could do that, but we instead give you these alternative ways of getting the input for those fields. Like in this case, we're demonstrating an @secret method, which will actually look for a secrets file in a certain location and read the password out of that. If you're using like Docker Swarm secrets, you can obviously manage the lifetime of those secrets independently from the Docker containers. You can also just do a file. You can get it out of the environment variable, or you can even ask us to prompt as part of the server startup process. So now I'm going to show you I'm going to demonstrate bringing up two different servers. On the left, this is going to be the first server, so it obviously has a little more configuration involved. And on the right, there we go. This is an additional server that's going to reference the first server that we created and get its ID from the first server. So let me go show this. Okay. So I will we are going to run. This is just the same JSON file that I just had in the slide. So here, this is an on-premise Domino server. So on Windows, so I'm actually going to run the end server program, and I'm just going to pass in, I'm going to say autoconfig, and I'm going to pass in this JSON file. So when I hit enter, oops, get the window focus, it actually starts a Domino server, and it is doing some work here. You can see it's creating a mail file for the administrator, creating a reports database, some other system databases. And the server has now actually started. And after the server startup chatter is done, we'll say show ID vault. And you can see that the ID vault was also created as part of that process as we asked. So now I have a second Domino server install on this laptop. And so now I'm going to run nserver to configure this instance. And in this case, I'll abbreviate autoconfig to just -a. And I will tell it I want to do the additional server JSON, which was the simpler JSON file. It takes a moment because the server is actually copying the nav over from the primary server. And that is done. And here comes the second server. It's a little confusing with the overlaps. And there you go. So we now have both a primary server and a secondary server brought up and fully configured using JSON. So going back to the slide for one moment. And there was one additional thing I want to show you, which is that in some environments or under some circumstances, it's not really convenient to require a JSON file to hold the parameters, right? So support an alternative syntax where you can use environment variables. So if you take the JSON file configuration and you look at the section server setup, server type, for example, then you can express that as an environment variable over here as server setup underscore server underscore type equal and the value. That's pretty straightforward. You can see that those names are just underscore separated versions of the parameter names in the JSON file. And what that allows us to do, here is we can then put those into a file. And we can then start, hopefully I have the Docker line here. I don't seem to. Let me go get it. Okay, so we can then do like a Docker run and the name of my server. And then here I reference the environment variable file. I'm just going to show you this one. My port mapping, and then my image, and then tell it I want to do a -- autoconf. For Docker, it's autoconf, not autoconfig. I press enter, and now the Docker container is doing the initial configuration of the partition, copying templates over into localhost data. I didn't attach a volume here. Normally, you would create a separate volume so that Domino would persist between sessions. This will just take a moment. I should play the Jeopardy music. There we go. And so now it's gone ahead and created the log NSF, and it's doing the same thing basically that we just saw, and the server is up and running. So that's everything I have for my demo. Let me stop sharing. Oh, no, actually I have one other thing. I'm not going to demo it today, but I just wanted to point out that in the next early access drop, we are also going to have the sharing, Dale sharing enabled so that you can create a shared encryption key for multiple servers in your cluster. You can encrypt Deus objects with a common key. That'll be useful even outside of the tier 2 context. It'll allow you to have, for example, a common set of backup and restore objects, and objects will be transportable across servers. But in addition, you can enable Deus Tier 2, and it will automatically figure out when you have multiple servers using the same attachment, and it will share a single instance of those. So all good stuff coming up in the next drop. And Nirmala, we can make you the presenter.
Okay. Hey there. So today I'm going to talk about, I think, what you already have seen in other demos, which is the TOTP support in Domino for web applications. So let me share my short video. While the video is running, I'm going to be talking about some of the UI and the backend server aspects. So let me share my screen here. You guys see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. So let me play from here. Okay, so in the demos of the factory tour, you would have seen the new addition to Domino security part of Domino to support TOTP as a part of multi-factor authentication for web applications, right? So as part of that feature, what we have done is enhance the DOM config template to provide a customized login form that not only takes the username password, but also adds support for configuring and validating the TOTP token that your device can produce. As you can see here, we are moving to a more modern UI. You can see that there is ways in the UI to hide or show your TOTP token while typing. So depending on where you are, whether you are at an airport or whether people are watching behind you or in your office, you can turn it off. Typically, people like us, like to show their TOTP token because they make typos, right? And the UI also lets you log in if you have a pre-configured device. So the first time you enter into a website that is configured for TOTP, you log in without it, you will be taken to a setup page. But if you want to configure multiple devices, because people have multiple devices today that they can use, like a tablet or a phone, it also lets you set up multiple devices from this page. So let me play the video here. So once you have one device, the login mandates that you have to use the token from the device, even if you have to set up additional, right? So this is the security. Once your website is enabled for TOTP and you have set up TOTP, you do need to log in with a TOTP token. And once you are in this MFA setup page, you can configure up to 3 additional devices. As you saw in the previous screen, I had one already configured and I'm adding one more. But the setup is pretty similar, whether you have the first device or the second device, the MFA UI itself, setup UI is the same. And again, this is a brand new UI. It is written completely in React, JavaScript, and Material UI. And it makes backend calls to the Domino web server via REST APIs. And I'll talk about it in the next set of slides. Again, you can see the UI has a way to hide or unhide the display of the tokens. We recommend that you display it so that you don't make typos and you can get through in quickly and validate and get to the website. Again, this shows that you can configure up to 3 devices and the user has controls to delete all but one device, right? So because once you have one device, you need to validate with the token to get into any website. So we don't want the users to shoot themselves in their feet by deleting their one device that's left out there. And the configuration also provides you a way to generate and reset scratch codes, right? In case your device gets mucked up, you lose your device, your TOTP application crashes and you need to get to your website. We don't, we want you to use, have emergency backup codes saved off so you can continue to get to your internet site or website and not be hampered by not having the device, lost or, mucked up. Here, as the user is setting up the device, I've brought in the web developer tool just to show what the UI is invoking behind the covers, right? Each of these HTTP requests that are going to the backend are Domino that's REST APIs. So you have REST APIs for creating, your REST APIs for validating a config, and you have REST APIs for deleting or resetting scratch codes. So so this is like, state-of-the-art framework where we have nice modern JavaScript front end talking to Domino all the way back using REST APIs, and able to self-set up their TOTP configuration on one or more devices and able to manage. Let me finish. So once the user has done one or more devices setup, they can launch into their application or the site they are hitting, right? So the UI will automatically redirect them because this is the website they were trying to hit when they started off doing the MFA setup. And that's where they go to once they have finished the setup. So all that is taken care behind the covers, so the user experience is much more cleaner and nicer. So with that, I will go to the next video, right? So here I want to talk more about what is going on behind the covers, right? The UI is making REST API calls to the backend, and where does all this information go? So, we are trying to move towards securing most of the user secrets, like password, ID files, etc., into the user's ID vault document. So as you can see here, I have opened up the ID vault database as a vault admin on the server, and I can look at the vault documents, right? So this is my example test user who is configured for 3 TOTP devices. Okay, so they can log in from using the TOTP token from any of those devices, and the UI is able to handle, and the backend is able to handle all of them seamlessly. All you need is 1, but you can go up to 3. Each of the configuration information here, the TOTP configs, the number of configs, the scratch codes, all of this are completely secure. Nobody will be able to, even the vault administrator cannot look at them, as you can see, because they are encrypted with the vault operations key, like how your ID file, NOS ID file is protected. And the ID vault database also has the user's view enhanced to show their TOTP state, whether the TOTP configuration has been validated, how many users the user has registered, and if they have scratch codes available to use, right? So the scratch codes that we generate on first time, we generate 10 scratch codes. That's the default. It cannot be changed out of the box, and they are one time, right? So each time you use one of those scratch codes, basically you have only one shot use, and once they are validated, they are taken out. So this count will go down as the user uses their scratch codes. So that way we keep log of how many scratch codes the backend has used. So, so the user, again, doesn't shoot themselves in their foot. And if they need to generate, they can go to the UI to generate scratch codes for later uses. And let me play this video here. So again, it just shows that the user's information for TOTP is all protected. Nobody can have access to it other than the vault server itself. And we also have changed the admin client to be able to reset the user's TOTP config in case, like their vault ID password, if it gets messed up, we are able to reset. And that is done by issuing a new cross-certificate for multi-factor authentication at an organization level. It's very similar to the password reset certificate. So that way the admin client is able to do the resets for users' TOTP. So now let's talk about how the TOTP gets configured, right? So here is like a website or the internet site. In the security section is where you enable the TOTP options. Once you enable and save, here you can see that the REST API for TOTP gets automatically enabled, along with all the different HTTP methods for put and delete, typically get, post, or default enabled for all websites. But since the MFA setup UI does push and deletes as part of the user creation and deletion for the config, we want to make sure it's enabled by default. So I'll just, the video will bring up document properties for this website that will show these methods enabled in a few seconds. Yeah, so by default, typically you have only up to 1 to 5 enabled. Here you can see 6 and 7, which matches for put and delete also enabled. So once you enable TOTP in the security section, you have all these fields automatically enabled. So the user has to do, the administrator has to do minimal config at this point. And so when we made the TOTP enablement configurable by website, right? But the top level enablement is done via the server config document. The server config document is where you want to list all the web servers and ID wall servers that you want to, that's part of the TOTP configuration to be enabled for TOTP. And then you can control the individual website enablement for TOTP. So that way, if you have multiple websites that are not yet ready for TOTP, because of the state where how the users have, they may not have ID walls, then you can, control it at a website level. And I believe that's all I have for the demo here. Arnaldo, if you want to open up everybody for questions.
Okay, Nirmala, thank you. By now, everyone should unmute themselves. Okay, so you have a question, please feel free to ask.
And those questions can be about any Domino database issue.
Yeah, actually we have a set of panelists from the Domino development team available here. Ken Brunson, Mark Delanis, Steve Watts, Curtis X for Traveler, and myself and Gary, and Brian Richards available from the Domino development team to answer your questions.
Hi, this is Heather. I posted a question in the chat about when a new device is configured, is it possible for the user to get an email notification that a new one has been set up?
Yes, we are working on that. So we already have a backlog item. There's a lot of background. Sorry, a lot of background noise somewhere.
Okay, and another question around the MFA piece. You were just talking about the internet site document. If I wanted it configured at a high level for my server, and let's just say I have 10 websites I'm supporting on that Domino server, can I use an internet website to take it off of one of those respective websites?
Correct. So we have a server config to enable at the top level, right? But each of the individual enablement is controlled via the website document. So if you have 10 websites, right now our server has like multiple websites on the same server, and I have enabled TOTP for internal deployment only on one website, right? Others don't have it enabled. Are you asking for enabling on all sites at the same time, or you want that control?
I'm asking for the granular control.
Yes, so we do have the granular control. The control is at the internet site level.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes. And the same level of controls exists even for like virtual servers. If there are configurations that run today out of the same server document and having multiple virtual servers created, the same support exists there too. So, we just need V12 servers deployed for ID walls and the web servers and enabled for TOTP right in the via server config document, and any of the participating virtual servers or internet sites will be able to take advantage.
Nirmal, there's a question about is the ID vault mandatory?
Yeah, I'm asking whether it is for server setup fees that Gary was talking about, or it's for TOTP. For TOTP, it is mandatory.
And it's not mandatory for server setup, although I think that the intent is to make it the default.
Correct.
I think one thing we can safely say to everybody is if they eventually want to be using Nomad Web, they will have to be setting up ID vaults. So they should become familiar with them and start getting them set up properly. They are great once you get them configured.
Yeah, and over the past few releases, we have added a lot of tooling to improve reliability and recovery of ID vaults and maintenance of ID vaults, right? And we continue to put that time in for every release so that customers have easy way of maintaining.
I have a question about a new ODS for 12. Can you tell us what might be coming? That's sort of directed at Steve to share.
Yeah, well, there is a new ODS for version 12 that is being worked on. Currently, we're looking at increasing the field size. So non-summary fields could be up to, I think, 2 gigabytes. And summary fields could be greater than 64K. There is increased ACL size up to 64,000 entries in the ACL. Views, you can put categorized data. So like the group member list, that can be over 64K, but on a read entries of the view, you have to select for the data not to be returned, because we can only return up to 64K of data. So the view interfaces are not changing. So you'd be able to have a single group member list for groups. You don't have to do the subgroups anymore. I think that's the main things that are being looked at right now.
Nirmal, one of the other features that I like as an admin is finding about what group people are in. Can you speak a little bit about the enhancement in the Directory Nav?
Sure. So we had a few requests around group and auto-population of groups, right? The first one, I think that went into the October early access drop was, auto-populate groups. There are ways right now you can have only pre-configured formula to select auto-population by mail server and such. So we added a way to introduce like an LDAP type formula so you can customize how you want to populate the group members. That's one thing. And then the other way is that you can figure out or have the UI list the groups that a user is part of. So when you click on the find groups from selecting a person, then it traverses basically all of the groups that the user is part of with limits up for nesting reasons, right? and it brings up a new UI that shows how in which groups the user is part of, and it will list all the multiple groups in that UI. And that is available in the early access program too. So I recommend customers really try that. Another thing that one of my favorite features is finding out the server config docs that apply to a server, in your Domino domain. Again, people have multiple configuration docs, and typically there are conflicts with respect to all the settings that come from different config docs. So, if you're managing hundreds of servers in a domain, I think that is a very nifty feature that will show you what are the configs that a server is part of, and eliminate, possible issues with configuration where there could be conflicts. I'm going to paste the link to our early access program. So it's a lot of useful documentation out there. Give me a minute. So that top level link has all of the early access releases that we have available out there since August, right? A lot of cool security, admin, DAOs, shared objects related features that are already out there, right? We are still not yet in public beta, but we have several features in a very good shape, very solid shape that, some customers have tried and given us, feedback on improving. So Heather, one of the questions I think that people asked was for, having an email sent out once the user is configured, and, we've already planned that for an upcoming iteration. So we are taking constant feedback and being very agile about delivering those.
Right. And one point I'd like to make is I know it's a Docker image and many people aren't comfortable yet. There are instructions to learn it. I started learning it myself. But just participating in the forum, you're going to get access to the feedback from others. You'll be able to look at the documentation that we presented and learn about the features. There are also, after this early adopter program completes, we will have a couple of betas as we've had in the past, early next year. Where we highly encourage everybody to participate there as well and download it and install it, because everybody's environment's a little bit different. You'll certainly help us continue to build quality into the Domino server, which I think we've done a really good job over the years, and part of that is because of your help in the beta programs as well. And you'll have your usual full kits of it, that you're used to available in those betas, as well as Docker images.
And it'll be covering multiple platforms too, right? It's just not going to be just Docker. So you will have Windows and full-featured nodes and admin client, and for the Domino server, multiple platforms.
I'd also like to give Nirmal and her team credit for a lot of the work he's done in languages, and you may kind of say what our ultimate goal is for when we do ship and having multiple languages available in the betas, correct?
Correct. So for both for betas and for the actual GA, our plan is to SimShip, all the language kits. I believe Thomas Sample covered that as part of his presentation. So our plan is to continue giving out, along with the core Domino English kit language kits, and also for nodes, same for nodes clients too. We have made a lot of progress in that front by automating a lot of steps involved in the language translation and kit production process, right? So it's a work in progress, but we are already reaping a lot of those benefits from the mistakes that or lessons that we learned from the past releases with language packs. Any chance you can provide an EC password reset template? I thought we already had a sample password reset NSF app that ships with Domino.
Yeah, whatever Dave Cohen set up for me that I use internally is really effective. It's just a simple URL that I'm able to give to the end users. It happens all the time that they forget their passwords, and they do have to. I usually reset their password to something, and then I set them to the password reset site where they have to change that password to something else.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we do have that sample, but we should double check and make document that a little bit easier, because that is
right.
Nice.
Right. It may not be a part of the kit. If so, I think we might just ship that along. So we'll take that back. So Martin, any feedback on how we can make web application and user management for web users better or more seamless? Could we have a better display for design element forms views on the web?
App dev session going on now. But we can route that question to them.
I think both might be bridging that gap longer term. That's both for the web, and it basically uses the underlying forms and fields and views as design elements.
I just have a quick future roadmap type of question. Is the overall goal at some point to get rid of the Notes ID, or just to make it so that the user doesn't even really know they have a Notes ID and there is no need for an actual binary file on the local machine?
The overall goal is to hide the Notes ID under the vault and provide users access to vault or encrypted content using either SAML or biometric authentication or TOTP, right? That's the whole goal. As part of the TOTP, once you log in, one of the things that we are looking at is, for a user to have encrypted content access, right? When they want to send an encrypted mail or whether they want to open an encrypted mail, decrypted basically. We try to avoid asking for password. Today that happens with Traveler or, even with Words or iNotes, right? You'll be prompted for a password unless you have the ID file in the user's mail file, which is a lot of administration that gives rise to all kinds of synchronization problems. So we still want the ID to be mainly in the ID vault, but avoid all the synchronization problems and have other means of users getting at that data. And so you have several vectors you can configure with external SAML identity providers, or you can use biometric authentication, very similar to no single or no shared login, right? Or go towards the model of like TOTP, where we would add a complete different vector where you can use your TOTP token to get access to your encrypted documents. So what we are trying to do is still have the ID file be registered along with when you register a user, right, whether it's a nodes or a web user, but hide their password completely.
I think, Nirmal, the bottom line is the Notes ID itself makes this a much more secure environment, right?
Correct.
But we certainly want to hide it to not make it as difficult for the end user. So,
right. Not difficult for both the end user and the administrator to manage. So the theme is like bury the ID file.
Okay, and I understand what you're saying. I'm just trying to wrap my head around then, because, for how many years, 20 years at least, I've had to think about managing for users both their Notes ID and their HTTP password, okay? And also the security around that. Specifically, as you all know, we have a security settings document that allows you to have some really nice controls over the Notes ID password, but right now there is no control for somebody that just has a web-only password. Your only option there is if you're doing synchronization between the two and the user changes their ID using Notes, the rich Notes client, and then it synchronizes to the web, giving you a strong web ID or web password, excuse me. So how is that evolving then?
So one of the things that we added in 11, I believe in 11.0, in 11.0 is, we provided a way for users with registered Notes ID to actually use their Notes ID password instead of the HTTP password.
Yes.
Right? We are trying to get away from the use of the HTTP password, right? I know we have configurations that are kind of web only, but we are trying to go to the default of Notes only configurations with ID files, and having ways for all the other different vectors, whether it's a Notes client or a web client, to come at it to the ID vault, right? And then we are adding the vectors to move away from password to all the newer forms of identity, like either the SAML or biometric authentication, or TOTP or MFA. So we are kind of doing it from different directions. And so that's one of the reasons when you saw Gary's, set up a new server, because we actually want to come with ID Vault on your, first server in your domain by default with ID Vault. We don't want now to not have ID Vault, because that's kind of the backbone of the full infrastructure.
Right. And I mean, what just clicked for me is what you said, the vector between the Notes ID and the SAML or the token authentication piece. So that basically, as a user, I have a Notes ID, but and that Notes ID is being leveraged, but I'm using something else to log in.
Correct.
And then will the user also have the ability to change the password on that within, like, for example, the Verse UI?
Password on the ID file?
Yes.
I believe so. I know Verse is working towards improving or getting to the point where they want to, manage encrypted access. So they want to move away from having ID files in the mail file and moving to ID Vault. So definitely all those vectors in terms of password management also will be improved. Yes.
Okay. I guess it's a higher level question then for a user that doesn't actually use a rich Notes client.
Correct.
How can they change the password in their Notes ID that's stored in the vault?
Exactly. Yep, we understand. That's the same question we also have. So we are trying to.
Okay. Okay.
So we're from different vectors, yes.
But I believe they can now through the Verse client, the Verse on-prem, correct, Nirmala? There's in the security settings, you can change the Notes ID password, and
I believe so. I thought they recently added that, I think, in one of their drops. We'll have to go back and check.
No, it's definitely there. I definitely use it. And have people use it.
Yeah. Actually, now, John, that you say that, I do remember it. Yes. Yes. Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. This is really great stuff, guys. Love it.
Thank you, Heather.
So guys, thank you for participating in this Meet Developer session. Hope to see you in the next session. Thank you.